I love that it within its pages contains the meaning of life, right? Like in an absurd way. Like the whole story explains Earth and its purpose as this supercomputer that is designed to determine the meaning of life. And like as a metaphor for existence, that's kind of profound. Like there's so many layers to this, right? Like, I don't know. I love that. Like, what if the meaning is to question the meaning? Like, what if that's the meaning,
The reason for living is living. Like, this is, to experience.
And to question what the reason is. Like,
right.
to try and find out. Like, to forever pursue that question. What if that's the reason? Welcome to episode 176 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm Luke.
And I'm James.
And this week we discuss Douglas Adams's 1979 novel, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. James, do you have your towel? Are you ready to take a ride through the galaxy?
Yes, yeah, I do. I have my...
Well, don't panic.
I don't panic, yeah. This story is... It's interesting because I think I've read it before. I don't remember for sure, but I think in my younger days I read this story, but I didn't remember anything from it. I've definitely seen the movie, and I'm familiar with like a lot of the things, like So Long and Thanks for All the Fish and some of the other like cultural references from it. But it was a lot of fun to revisit.
It's funny. I have a very similar story with this. I have it marked as read on my Goodreads when I went and pulled it up. And I was like, did I read this book? I must have, right? I think I read it when I was really young, like maybe my teenager years. And reading it this time, I was like, God, I forgot like so much of this.
Yeah.
So it's just been a long time, and apparently I have a shitty memory, so it's mostly gone now. And revisiting it now was like a completely different experience. Like I've learned so much about writing and doing the podcast now and everything. I came in with a very different perspective on it. We talked about it a little bit before we started recording how this is going to be one of those tricky projects where I don't want to be insufferable and just like repeat a lot of the jokes from the book, which I realized I kind of did at the start of the episode. But I mean, like, that's going to be the trap. So like ultimately, like if you're looking for people to like tell you, like remind you of all your favorite jokes from the book, that's probably not what we're going to do. We'll touch on some of our favorites, I'm sure, but instead we're going to talk about like who Douglas Adams is as a person or was, what the history of the book was, because I did a lot of research into that. It was really interesting. Our reactions to it, how we liked it as a novel. And then we'll get into the actual plot and react to that in general. But yeah, I mean, that's how I picture this episode is going to go. What do you think?
Yeah, that sounds good to me. I gotta say, like right off the bat, like I love this book. I knew that, like, sort of when I keep referencing this. I hope that these things aren't like. I hope people don't take these things and think that they're like exactly the same. But when we read Good Omens, the sort of like British dry humor tone of that story reminded me of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I think I even said at that time, and I love that. I love the tone of that. I love for my sensibilities, this is one of those stories that like, it's very funny. It's clearly like well researched, but it's also not, it's well researched, but it's just like taking big swings at like all this sci-fi jargon and stuff that they're creating for this world building that they're doing for this universe. Yeah. But it's also so clever. It's so clever. It's got so many funny moving parts in it. And like, it's one of those books that makes me laugh. And I actually was having this conversation recently. Like, I've been trying to create a playlist that kind of like encapsulates all of the songs that describe me as a person. And I was thinking about, and I was trying to think of like a list of books. And I think this sort of this tone of story would definitely speaks to me to the point that like a story like this or Good Omens would definitely be on that list of books that kind of describe my sensibilities. If you didn't know me,
if you were going to come up with a list of books that
if you didn't know me and I was going to create a list of books, this is probably going to be on there, just because it really speaks to me.
I think a lot of people would agree with that. You know, this is an incredibly popular book that, again, we are going to be covering Sleepy Hollow coming up here pretty soon. And I had a post on Twitter about how I always felt like that was a story I never really fully got. Like, I didn't know what its origins were. And I'm curious to get into it and find out about it. I realized that that's kind of true with this. Like, it's kind of a cultural phenomenon, and I see so many references to it. And even though I think I'd kind of read the novel before, I must not have like read it very deeply because I kind of forgot it. Like, I didn't know who Douglas Adams was. I didn't know the legacy, that kind of stuff. And in doing research for it, I feel like I finally get it now. And I think so much of it is bound up in who he was as a person. So I'm excited to get into that. But before we do, a little bit of housekeeping stuff. We just launched a bookshop page, which is through bookshop.org, which if anybody knows about that, basically it's like it was set up to be an alternative to Amazon for book sales that would support local bookstores. And I think it was set up prior to the pandemic, but I saw a lot of people talking about during the pandemic to help try and keep bookstores afloat. And I think they donate like a portion of all their proceeds to local bookstores and local book organizations. We were able to set up a online bookshop, like storefront, through their website, and you can create book lists on there. We were able to do that and populate it with the books that we've covered on the podcast and the books of different guests who've been on the podcast. And so if you were curious, if you wanted to like see all that in one spot, we'll have the link down in the show notes. Check it out. And if you want to buy something on there, that'll directly help the podcast. So I just thought that was a cool new thing. Wanted to pass it on to our listeners.
I love it. I think it's amazing that you found that, and any way we can support like local businesses, local bookshops and stuff like that, because there's something so important to me when I walk into a bookstore and I can feel like old books and used books and things like that. I think that's awesome. So
yeah, brick and mortar, and especially in pandemic times, I feel like all of us have been deprived of that. And yeah, that's one of those things. Once I'm fully vaccinated, that I'm excited to like get back into bookstores more frequently and browse.
Definitely.
Powell's here in Portland, for example. One other thing, we just released a Patreon video, one of our first times doing video content, where we did a tier ranking list of all of our projects, well, all of the adaptations from our first and second seasons. And that was a lot of fun. It was a weird, like, different sort of thing we'd never really done before, and it kind of experimental content. And we always felt like Patreon's a good place to kind of try that out. So if you're curious about that, you can actually make your own tier list if you wanted to. I put a link down in the description of the video. But yeah, check that out on our Patreon if you're curious about that.
Rare video content from us, and like that is something that we've been thinking for a long time that we want to do more of. So let us know if you liked it, staring at our faces the whole time and everything like that, instead of just hearing us as per usual.
Yeah, definitely let us know. And if it's something that people seem to like, which early indications are people are enjoying it, maybe we'll do more of it for like later seasons that we did. But back to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Douglas Adams. Yeah, my general reaction to the book before we get into the biography. I had so much fun with it. Like, this book, it puts a smile on your face. I alternated between reading my physical copy and listening to the audiobook, which is narrated by Stephen Fry. Found out there's multiple versions of this, but this is the most recent one that was made to coincide with the release of the film, because he voices one of the characters in the film. And it's an excellent audiobook. I think he does a fantastic job reading it. And yeah, it's like, this is the kind of book that is so easy to read. It's so fun. It's so funny. And it's such a great piece of sci-fi. And I don't know, like, it's charming. It's dry. It's got that dry British wit, like you said. And it just, like, I can see why so many people fall in love with this. In many ways, it sort of like makes fun of science fiction.
Yeah, definitely.
It's very self-aware in that way.
In a way, it kind of reminds me of the way that like Shaun of the Dead is sort of like a comedy send up of like a zombie horror film.
I was thinking about how an Edgar Wright adaptation of this would be amazing, but
Absolutely,
we're gonna watch the movie next week. We'll see how it goes, but I would love to see an Edgar Wright version of this.
That comedy spin on it, and it's so lovingly done. Like I said, there's something about it that feels very well researched. Like it's someone who knows what they're talking about within it in order to spin it on its head and create all these interesting situations. And I was, it was laugh out loud funny at sometimes. I got really attached to the characters, and it's just so clever. And the way that it breaks convention in some ways of like jumping over to see the perspective of like mice on Earth and like all of these funny things that he comes up with. I'm just like, I'm in love with her. Yeah. It's really funny.
It's got this narrator who's got this excellent dry, like observational humor that he's making. Cause he, the narrator is basically God. It seems like, and then there's like so many fun things said about God and,
the way they tackle religion, there's a section for that, and I thought that was amazing.
Yeah. So we'll get into some of the reasons for that too. All this stuff is super interesting, but
yeah, and I don't know a ton about Douglas Adams, so I am really interested to hear sort of why he wrote the story and everything.
Well, the first thing I want to say is that this novel is itself an adaptation.
Really?
Yeah, he started writing it as a radio show. And then the radio show was wildly popular when it came out. And he then adapted the novel the following year. And then he would release further episodes of the radio show as he was writing further novels.
Wow. So is it similar? It's very similar to what we get. Like it's sort of the same tone and everything. It wasn't like a more serious
similar
thing?
But different. We'll get into some of it. And so it's just fascinating that even this is an adaptation of something else. So adaptations all the way down, I guess. It's funny to think about how often that happens. Also, he's famous for like taking other projects of his own and cannibalizing them for Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy books, which is we'll get into it. It's a 6-book trilogy, which is hilarious.
I did see that there were a lot. Yeah. I honestly, like I want more, so I think I got to go check it out.
Yeah, me too. I was just thinking about how much I should go read more books in this series.
Especially if they're as brief and like fun and page turning as this was. I'd love to just like consume some of this.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll put them on the bookshop, actually. I'll put all of them on the bookshop, so if you want to get them all in the same place, you'll be able to. Anyway, so let's talk a little bit about Douglas Adams. I actually have an immense amount about him. There's he's a beloved author who a lot was written about him, a lot is known about him. So I can't really touch on all of it. So we'll kind of move through and you can just ask me questions and I'll let you know things I know about him. Then we'll get into the plot, but let's start there. Born Douglas Noel Adams, he was born in 1952, died on May 11th of 2001, the age of 49, which we'll get into. He was an English author, screenwriter, essayist, humorist, satirist, and dramatist. He was the author of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which originated in 1978 as a BBC radio comedy, before developing it into a, quote, trilogy of 5 books that sold more than 15 million copies in his lifetime and generated a television series, several stage plays, comics, a video game, and in 2005, a feature film. He is in the UK Radio Academy's Hall of Fame. He also wrote Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency, The Long Dark Tea Time of the Soul, and co-wrote The Meaning of Liff and The Deeper Meaning of Liff. Liff or Life? I don't know. It's Liff. And The Last Chance to See. He wrote 2 stories for the television series Doctor Who, and co-wrote City of Death, which served as which was, I think, an episode of Doctor Who, and served as the script editor for its 17th season in 1979. He co-wrote the Monty Python sketch, Patient Abuse, which appeared in the final episode of Monty Python's Flying Circus. He was one of only 2 men to be credited as a writer on Monty Python who weren't part of the core crew.
All right, we gotta stop there really quickly. This is British royalty at that point. You're on Python, you worked on Doctor Who, and he wrote these stories, and this is all before the age of 49. Obviously, that's incredible.
This was all when he was really young.
Wow.
He was like in his 20s when this was happening. Yeah. So he was incredibly tall. He was 6 feet tall by the age of 12, and would go on to be 6'5". But he was like teased a lot for his height, and because of that, like he was a very quiet, reserved child who his like teachers are incredibly worried about, and he really shined when he started getting into creative writing. And in fact, he got the first ever 10 out of 10 score by his teacher named Halford for creative writing. This is the first 10 out of 10 score ever given. And this is something that Douglas Adams remembered for the rest of his life, particularly when facing writer's block. Wow. He would remind himself of getting awesome. A 10 out of 10, which I think is pretty funny. Yeah. So he really struggled with his early writing to make ends meet. So he took on a series of odd jobs, which included hospital porter, barn builder, bodyguard, and chicken shed cleaner. He would end up moving back home with his mother, and become seriously depressed. This was in like 1976. The lack of writing work hit him hard, and low confidence became a feature of his life. Quote, "I have terrible periods of lack of confidence. I briefly did therapy, but after a while I realized it was like a farmer complaining about the weather. You can't fix the weather, you just have to get on with it." He would go on to write his first radio series, The Hitchhiker's Guide, 2 years later in 1978. Well, he's writing in 1977. And he did not expect it to be this monstrous success that it was. But let's back up a little bit. I want to talk about how he came up with the name. He told this story on a Letterman interview, and he probably had told it before, I'm not sure, but I saw it on a Letterman interview in 1985. He was I think he was like 17, and he had been hitchhiking around Europe, and he was drunk in Austria, laying in a field. Apparently he was like so poor that he couldn't afford to like get around, so that's why he was hitchhiking. And this is a time when people hitchhiked a lot. And he had a book called The Hitchhiker's Guide to Europe that he, I guess he was like laying in the field with, and he was like thinking about the book, and he was looking up at the stars, and he thought to himself, someone should write a book that's a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And then he like passed out or something. And apparently many years later, when he was coming up with this drama, this is what he went back to. He went back to that idea of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy that had stuck with him. So yeah, laying drunk in a field in Austria, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, props. That's a great concept for a story, though, right? Like, it's so right away the title just tells you so much.
Yeah, it's cool. So yeah, he started writing this series, and it takes off. It becomes wildly popular. This was all after, by the way, the Monty Python stuff. That all happened before this. So he had some success, but then his like style fell out of fashion. And he even said later that like at the time he wanted to be John Cleese, and it took him a while before he learned that job was taken. Was like his quote that he said, which I think is pretty funny.
I love Monty Python, so it's cool to hear that he worked with them, and it's, I mean, like, can you imagine being one of only 2 people to ever work with Monty Python that wasn't in the cast? Like, that's insane.
Yeah, well, to write for them, but yeah.
Right.
So his radio series takes off. He starts writing this book, and immediately becomes like massively successful. Money starts pouring in. He had like personal struggles. He had grown up with his father apparently had multiple wives, and Douglas would also go on to have like many different affairs with different women. He would eventually settle down, but he struggled with his romantic life, and heavy drinking apparently was like a big part of his life. He struggled with that at the same time as he struggled with writer's block. He was kind of famous for really having difficulty finishing projects. But it's interesting because he also would take on tons of work. So like he took on the Doctor Who stuff at the same time that he was supposed to be writing these novels. Mm-hmm. And then it ended up being like apparently a ton of work. Like they were basically having him rewrite entire episodes based off of like someone would hand him like 4 pages, like a 4-page script, and he'd have to make it into like, an hour-long episode of television. And so he was basically writing the episodes at that point based off of next to nothing. And he was doing all of this while he was on deadline. He famously was quoted as saying, "I love deadlines. I love the whooshing noise they make as they go by," which I remember reading that in like a writing book, like, I don't know, 20 years ago or something. Well, yeah, it had to have been. Yeah. Anyway, I feel like that quote's always stuck with me. But yeah, apparently he would have sessions where like his editor would like set him up in a hotel and he'd be in there for weeks at a time, and the editor would just be like hounding him about finishing the books in time. I don't know, some pretty funny stories. It seems like he struggled with deadlines, but then he would always procrastinate, and then he'd do like a flurry of stuff at the very end. I even read that he was sometimes finalizing scripts for the Hitchhiker's Guide radio show as people were like recording their lines. He was like finalizing the scripts and stuff. So like he was like always procrastinating, finishing stuff. I don't know. I think it's pretty funny. As someone who also struggles with procrastination myself, I don't know. I feel that. He called himself a radical atheist, and I thought this was kind of interesting. When asked why radical, he said it was for emphasis, so he would not be asked if he meant agnostic. He liked to imagine a sentient puddle who wakes up one morning and thinks, quote, "This is an interesting world I find myself in, an interesting hole I find myself in. Fits me rather neatly, doesn't it? In fact, it fits me staggeringly well. Must have been made to have me in it." And that was kind of his sort of idea about like religion and people, assuming that there's a God and that there's meaning. And I think this question about what life means and what the universe means and what the world means, like that's all throughout this novel. And it all comes back to the absurdity of it all, right? Like this is something that philosophers have talked about, endlessly, just how absurd life is. And he takes that absurdity, and I feel like there's like, you can either go to like cosmic horror or you can go to pure like satire of humor, and it's kind of like the same thing, but it's like, are you horrified by it or are you just amused? And he takes it into the amusement realm.
I mean, and it is touched on throughout the novel. We get the not to give too many spoilers, but like we get the petunias, their outlook on life. We get the whale, the sperm whale. We get many different people talking about, that's the philosophers that we learn about with the deep truth and everything. So
deep thought, the computer.
Deep thought.
These supercomputers are awesome. Like they're very interesting characters. I mean, it's all dealing with the absurdity of existence, and I feel like Douglas Adams, laughs in the face of all of that.
And I think that that's how I have to be as well. Like just personally, I don't know about you, but like I can't help but think about like it just. It's either, like you said, you either laugh at it or you curl into a ball, and like there's two ways of going about it. And for myself personally, it's just unknowable. We're so small specks of dust in this universe that like it's just insanity, and like you can't comprehend it. And for me, it's like I have to just laugh at it and just think like none of this means anything at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think laughing at the delusions of grandeur is like a big part of the book too, right? Like all these people who think they're so important, all these life forms who think they're so important, and they're cosmically just not. And I don't know, the whole thing's hilarious when you look at it that way. So one other thing that I just wanted to touch on is that later in life, and when I say later in life, like in the 80s, he became a huge environmental activist, and campaigning on the behalf of endangered species. Apparently, he once participated in a climb of Mount Kilimanjaro while wearing a rhino suit for a British charity organization, Save the Rhino International. Yeah, I mean, apparently that became a big part of his life, was like environmental conservation, which
that's awesome.
I think that's really cool. Yeah,
it's very cool.
So in 2001, abruptly, while working out at a gym in California, he abruptly died of a massive heart attack from undiagnosed coronary artery disease. Came as a complete shock to people. His fans were heartbroken. He's 49 years old, incredibly young, and it became this like rallying thing where 2 weeks after his death, his fans organized a tribute known as Towel Day, and every year they still celebrate Towel Day on May 25th. Which, if we were smart, we'd do May 25th as our like release or something, but we didn't do that. But
wow, I mean that's awful.
Yeah, it's awful. And he, I don't know. Like, I mean, there's so many things I left out. Cause like I learned so many things. Like he was friends with Pink Floyd. Richard Dawkins was like a friend of his. Stephen Fry, also a friend. He would have these parties apparently that were legendary, where like members of Pink Floyd would be there, and like all these people, you know, these celebrities, John Cleese, you know, like people from Monty Python. Like, he's like this super well known. Oh, he was really into Apple computers. He was like one of the really early adapters. I think I read that he was like the first person in England to own a Macintosh.
Wow.
He was a futurist, and he would talk about like he was giving like talks and writing essays and going to Silicon Valley and all this stuff, talking about the rise of the internet and what it was going to mean for the world. And so he was like super ahead of his time. He predicted a lot of things that would come to pass with the internet. It just a really interesting man who, you know, had this like crazy rise to success, struggled with writer's block and with depression, but still has this legacy, you know, that is, you know, clearly outlived him and will continue to do so, I think.
I wonder, and I know this is just me because I like Good Omens so much, I wonder if he had a connection to like Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett, and like I feel like they would run in similar circles, being like this style of writer in the UK.
I think he's hugely influential, you know, and like I don't know these to be true, but I there were several things I was thinking of while reading the book. I've been doing a Marvel like MCU rewatch, and we just watched because we've been doing it chronologically. We just watched Guardians of the Galaxy 1 and 2, and I felt like I could see the DNA, you know, of this book in that movie.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the absurdity of it, like having fun. It's, you know, it's galaxy spanning. You know, especially in like the second movie, it gets into some really like mind bending stuff that like you really can't even wrap your head around. Like the different like colorful, bizarre, you know, alien creatures that they encounter. Like all of this stuff, I'm like, I don't know. Like he didn't invent all this stuff, but like I feel like it's just out there.
I mean, he and Jack Kirby, a lot of people looked at Jack Kirby as like the colors and the tone of the stories and stuff like that. But yeah, like the you could see James Gunn directing the movies having been influenced by the comedic nature of something like this.
Well, and that's true, because you're saying the comics, because I don't know when the comics came out. I guess I don't know 60s. How in the 60s, okay,
70s.
Yeah, so maybe around the same time. I don't know. But all of this, I think it influences the director when he makes it anyway.
Right.
But the other one I was thinking of was Futurama, which I'm a massive Futurama fan, and I feel like so much of the like tone and the style of humor, while not the same, I just see a lot of similarities. And you know, of course, like Rick and Morty, and like there's all these like funny sci-fi titles out there that I feel like all owe something to Douglas Adams. Yeah,
I was definitely thinking of Rick and Morty as well, and Futurama is a great example too of like I remember hearing that like a lot of the writers on Futurama had like held PhDs in like scientific fields and stuff, and like that like the way that someone like that can create stories that then subvert those specific scientific things to create like interesting sci-fi that's also comedic. And like Rick and Morty is another good example of just like galaxy hopping, like crazy antics. You could never predict where it's going to go in some episodes. Like definitely the same kind of thing.
So one little story that I thought was interesting, a poem was found in a cupboard in the school that he attended in 2014. And apparently it was called, quote, "A dissertation on the task of writing a poem on a candle and an account of some of the difficulties thereto pertaining." He would have written this poem at the age of 17, which I just think is fun. Someone found it in a cupboard.
Insane.
School he went to.
That's awesome.
2014. Yeah, that's really neat. Just, I don't know. Like I really loved the book. I had a great time with it. I do think there's like a few things here or there that like where the comedy doesn't quite hold up, or it feels like punching down a little bit, or you know, there's some of that. Yeah, I'm not going to try and pretend like there's none of that. There is. I mean, it was written in the 70s, and it does feel that way in some ways. But like that, I felt like it was very minor. Obviously, I'm a white guy So, take that with a grain of salt. Like, it's not going to affect me as much as it might other people. But yeah, I mean, for my money, it really held up, was a lot of fun, and is something I would definitely recommend to anyone, honestly, especially if you're a sci-fi fan, to check this out.
Yeah, I totally agree.
All right, so I'm sure I have more stories about him because I watched like several videos about him. I watched interviews. I read all this stuff. So if it comes up, I'll bring it up later. But let's move into the actual plot of the book. The novel opens with an introduction describing the human race as a primitive and deeply unhappy species, as well as the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which provides info on every planet in the galaxy. Earthman Arthur Dent awakes in his home in West Country, England, to discover that the local planning council is trying to demolish his house and build a bypass, and lies down in front of the bulldozer to stop it. His friend, Ford Prefect, an alien researcher for the guide, from a small planet in the vicinity of Betelgeuse, who has been posing as an out-of-work actor from Guildford for 15 years, convinces the lead bureaucrat, Mr. Prosser, to lie down in front of the bulldozer for Arthur so that he can buy him 6 pints of beer at the pub. The construction crew begins demolishing the house anyway, but stops when a fleet of alien spacecrafts arrives on Earth undetected by human space agencies. The Vogons, a callous race of civil servants running the fleet, announce that they have come to demolish Earth and to make way for a hyperspace expressway. Ford and Arthur hitch a ride from the Dentrasis, who serve as the cooks on the fleet, and are allowed onto a spaceship traveling to Bernard's star. They are quickly discovered by the Vogons, who torture them by forcing them to listen to their poetry and then toss them out of an airlock. That just reminds me of, like, in the past, I think it was specifically on our Lovecraft Country episode, one of them, I talked about how the cosmic horror was tied to white supremacy in those books. And here, I think the cosmic absurdity is directly tied to bureaucracy. And like the soulless, like heartless bureaucracy. Like everybody is just slotted into they're just doing their job, right? The Vogons are just doing their job. Mm-hmm. Much like, this is basically lampshaded with what happens to Arthur, right? Like it's the same thing happens to Earth. And the galaxy itself seems to be like a giant bureaucracy where it's like people are just kind of going through the motions, doing their job. They don't really care. They're all just like concerned with their particular lot in life. Like mm-hmm. They talk about like, why would you do this? And it's like, oh, the hours are good. Like things like that are the reasons given. Like, I don't know. I think it's really clever to like tie your cosmic force to something. And I think that leads to like a really, I don't know, powerful, creative font that you can draw from.
And it's funny too, because it makes it feel inherently human and Earth-like. But then as time goes on, we come to learn that like that's because Earth is kind of based off of everything else in the universe, seemingly, because it's a creation.
It's amazing how tight it all feels, right? Like, because at first it feels like, how can this make sense? But then it's very Earth-centric, in the scheme of things we find out later. So what is your take on our two main characters we're introduced to here, Arthur Dent and Ford Prefect?
So Arthur just strikes me as like, of course, like sort of the everyman, but he's kind of a curmudgeon a little bit. He's got enough of him. We first meet him as his house is being like bulldozed, which I was like really invested in that story. I was like, they can't fucking do this. They're not allowed to do that. You can't just bulldoze somebody's house.
Yeah.
But I did love how it was I don't know. It immediately takes you on that fun journey of being like, at first you think Ford is kind of all knowing, like, because we get the perspective, we kind of understand really quickly that he's like an alien. Mm-hmm. And this idea of like, come to the pub and have a couple drinks and hang out. And then his house is being bulldozed and we see the world ending around him. And just how small that is in the grand scheme, and how Ford doesn't care. And even the bartender, I felt a little bad for the bartender because he has that realization, that really, really interesting explanation of how like there's a certain charge someone's body will give off, almost will like let you understand like the magnitude of something they're saying. Mm-hmm. And because he was saying it, and he's also an alien, and something about like the distances that he's traveled or something like that, the barkeep like felt the impact of that. So much
when
more.
He said that the world was going to end.
When he said the world was going to end, and he felt it in his bones. Like he
says like nice day for it or something.
Yeah, and then the world ends around them, and they hitchhike.
Yeah.
And I like Ford because he starts the all knowing character, and then he kind of gets relegated to being just another like, you know, person within the cog. And but I do like that he's a writer specifically, like he's kind of writing the guide and or at least revising.
Yeah, apparently that's what it really took off the story for him, Douglas Adams, as when he decided that would be the job. Right, like he had the concept of someone who came to Earth to write for the guide, and that's where the story really took off for him, and he was able to start plotting it.
And I know we don't want to talk too much about the jokes, but the idea of the joke of what's written in the guide about Earth being just like
mostly harmless,
most harmless, and then mostly revised to mostly harmless is incredible.
Yeah, really funny. I mean, there's so many good bits here, and just like, you know, one of the things I wrote down in my notes is just how like the meta text of the Hitchhiker's Guide, it's so clever, right? Like you have this like unassuming tome that has all this information. You call it the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and then you sell a book called the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The one in the book is described as having the words "Don't Panic" written on it. You put that on the cover of your book. Like it's so smart from like a marketing standpoint too. Like it's brilliant. And there's so many things that just come out of this that are like, I don't know, just classic stuff. Like in the towels described, like the reasons you would want a towel. Like there's so many great reasons. It's like one of the essential things to bring when you're hitchhiking.
And the best part about the towels to me is like all of those essential reasons to bring it. But more than anything, it's when you run into somebody else. If you have of everything you could possibly have, if you have a towel that shows like you're a capable person, like clearly, like if you had the wherewithal to remember where your towel was through all the adventuring through the galaxy, then like you got your shit together.
Yeah. And you know, I bet that was something that was in his Hitchhiker's Guide to Europe, you know? Like I bet a towel was one of the things they recommended you bring with you.
Yeah.
Like it's so funny.
One more thing about just writers writing in this story. Someone, I assume that he was probably someone who enjoyed poetry. You know, he's a writer, so I would assume he at least had an appreciation for it. And to have the moment where it's said that like these creatures, these aliens are like the second worst. They have the second worst poetry in the entire universe, and just how our Earthling Arthur responds to it, and to like our poetry that we love and means so much to us is like seemingly like primitive in the grand scheme of things within the universe. And I just thought that was really funny as well, and a funny nod to the fact that I'm sure that Douglas Adams loved poetry.
Maybe, I don't know. I think he certainly had a disdain for bad poetry.
Yes.
You know, like it's really hilarious that the torture they're subjected to is the Vogons reading them their bad poetry, which is hilarious. But I mean, a couple other good or great ideas I want to point out was like the Pangalactic Gargle Blaster, the most powerful drink in the universe. The description of what goes into it is so brilliant, because it's like absurdity and like things you could never find, things from these other distant planets, like olives, you know, like, so it's always like, there's like just a plain thing. Like it's all these little layers of jokes that work so well. But it's also like, I'm sure if you like, I guarantee you there are parties at conventions that serve a Pangalactic Gargle Blaster. I've probably had one before and not realized what the reference was. You know what I mean? Because like, sci-fi fantasy conventions love this kind of shit.
Yeah. I'd like to have one, so in the future I'll be looking out for it.
Yeah, the writing is just so clever. I wrote down one particular line that I know is famous, but when the Vogons show up, it said that the ships hung in the sky in much the same way as bricks don't.
I love that line too.
It's so clever, like just such a twist at the end of what you would expect. And there's so much of that in his writing. You know, like it's not the most like lush descriptive writing by any stretch, and in fact, it moves fast, but it is so funny and it's so clever.
It's sharp, and it breaks conventions in the way that you like. You're just not expecting. It's always shockingly funny.
All right, let's continue the plot summary. So meanwhile, Zaphod Beeblebrox, which by the way, I'm gonna have a time with these names. We'll see how it goes. Who's Ford's cousin and president of the galaxy, steals the spaceship Heart of Gold at its unveiling with his human companion Trillian. The Heart of Gold is enabled with, quote, infinite improbability drive that allows it to travel instantaneously to any point in space by simultaneously passing every point in the universe at once. After being tossed into space, Arthur and Ford are rescued by the Heart of Gold as it travels with the infinite improbability drive. Zaphod takes his passengers, Arthur, Ford, a depressed robot named Marvin, and Trillian, to a legendary planet known as Magrathea. Magrathea is said to have been a planet whose inhabitants specialized in custom building planets for others, but caused themselves to become rich as the rest of the galaxy became poor and disappeared. Although Ford initially doubts that the planet is Magrathea, the planet's computers sends them warning messages to leave before firing 2 nuclear missiles at the Heart of Gold. Arthur inadvertently saves them by activating the infinite improbability drive improperly, causing the Heart of Gold to remain in Magrathea and for the missiles to transform into a sperm whale and a bowl of petunias. The whale, which unsuccessfully tries to make sense of its existence, falls to the surface, opens a passage underground on impact. As the ship lands, Trillian's pet mice Frankie and Benji escape. Okay, so a lot happens here. We're introduced to Zaphod, the president of the galaxy, and this improbability drive, spaceship.
That's the thing I want to talk about most, really, is so we've talked in other stories, and I think specifically with Lord of the Rings, we talked about Tom Bombadil and the Sorting Hat in Harry Potter, and the way that like these like all-knowing beings affect stories. And I think there are a few of them in this story, right? So we have the improbability drive, we have the computers who seemingly know everything, are all-powerful. And then there are some characters, and then there's also this all-knowing being that's speaking to us.
The narrator.
The narrator. And I was just like, to juggle so many of those things, but then to use it to your advantage, to have pure chaos and randomness happen in your book. No one could ever wag a finger at you and be like, that can't happen within your story, because you've created these things that are like, this is an improbability drive. Anything could possibly, a whale could appear, we could turn nuclear bombs seemingly into a whale that's falling, and then create, for the plot of the story, create a tunnel that then, leads into what we need to get into inside of this planet. It's just, I don't know, ballsy, very ballsy.
This Deus Ex Machina is present throughout. It's introduced as a character essentially, and it's given a name, and that's how they're saved, right? When they're floating in space and they've tried all these they try like 5 different things in a row to not get shut out the airlock, and all of them fail. And I remember just thinking how brilliant it was, because like each one seems like it has so much promise, and then they just keep failing. They're out there, and they're 29 seconds into like a 30-second thing where they're gonna die, and they get rescued because it's so improbable. And because it's so improbable, that's why it happens.
And then it's not even just like random. It's not one occurrence too. It's like for the rest of the story, it seems to cascade too. There'll be like 5 or 6 random things happen in a row, and that's just like, and it's just like, well, it's the improbability drive,
Yeah.
But it works for the story, like it fits the story.
And we get introduced to one of my favorite characters here. And that's Marvin, the depressed robot. Absolutely love him. He's just sad about everything. Everything sucks. He every other, like, because there's so many artificial intelligences on this ship, like the doors are happy to open, and like the ship's computer is super joyful all the time. And then you have Marvin, who's the super intelligent computer, who's so intelligent that he's now depressed. And he's just so hilarious. I don't know. I love, everybody gets annoyed by him, but I love him.
In the story, you're saying?
Yeah, everybody in the story doesn't like him. Like Arthur, and everybody's like, oh, he's this guy again. But I love him.
So funny, so funny. And this is like 79, you said, or something like that, when this was written. So to be this far along and thinking about, and there's definitely other stories. I'm sure Philip K. Dick had other stories that we've even talked about, like Do Androids Dream and stuff like that. But robots and androids, having conscious AI, and then dealing with actual human emotion, and if you are a supercomputer like Marvin, and you can compute everything, you're thousands of times smarter than humans and things like that. You have access to the information. Think about how depressed we are when we start to really understand our lot in life, and then think of the robot that can comprehend so much more. It's hilarious.
It's so tight. It's like the smarter you are, the more depressed you'll be, I guess, is kind of the message there, which is kind of funny, darkly funny.
It can happen too, right? It's like ignorance is bliss is a saying that.
Well, he's like, Arthur's trying to talk to him about the sunset and how it's like the most incredible incredible thing he's ever seen, and Marvin's like, rubbish. Like, I don't know, it's just so funny. Like, yeah, I've seen it all before, you know. Like, he says something about like are there oceans on Earth, and he says yes, and he's like, I hate oceans. Like, he just like hates everything.
Yep. So
good. So a couple of, you know, interesting things happen here. Magrathea, which I think is a really cool concept, right? Like, it's this custom planet that builds custom planets, this like group of people who were super rich and like build custom planets for people. And I realize like now, because I've like learned about this concept more, like I could feel like we're getting in on simulation territory here, right? Like we're getting in on like creating universes, creating life, creating things that if you start going down that line, it's like, well, you know, does that mean that this was created? And I think even later on, Arthur says something about like, how do you know there's not something else even going on? And they just kind of hand wave it away and are like, don't worry about it. You know, that could be true, but you know, we can't worry about it. Which is basically like how you have to be, right? Like, we could just be an invention of, you know, the mice who live on our planet who created us as a
that are 5-dimensional
simulation
beings, and it's all to figure out the meaning of life. And
it could be that, and you would never know. That's what's like ironic about it, and it wouldn't change anything for you really, because you could never confirm it.
And really, it's like, does it matter in the end, right? And that's, I think, ultimately the moral right here is like, does it matter? Is it going to change how you? Because it's all about perception, like how you're viewing the world. You know, if that terrifies you, or it, you know, or if it's laughable to you that we're so small within this world, is it really going to change your day to day, how you feel about the people you know, and how you're going to strive for your goals still, and some of that stuff? Like, it's very interesting to think about it in those terms.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to read a little more summary. So on Magrathea, Zaphod, Ford, and Trillian venture down to the planet's interior while leaving Arthur and Marvin outside. Arthur is met by a man named Slarty Bartfast, who explains that the Magratheans have been in stasis for tens of thousands of years to wait out an economic recession. The Magratheans temporarily reawaken to construct a second version of Earth commissioned by mice, who were in fact the most intelligent species on Earth. In the factory workshop, Slarty Bartfast shows Arthur that in the distant past, a race of hyper-intelligent, pan-dimensional beings created a supercomputer named Deep Thought to determine the answer to the ultimate question to life, the universe, and everything. Two philosophers representing a trade association arrived and complained to the computer that the computer would remove uncertainty and end their jobs, and demanded deactivation. However, Deep Thought revealed that it would take 7.5 million years to complete calculations, and reasoned that during that time they could argue over what the computer's answer will be. 7.5 million years later, the philosopher's descendants asked Deep Thought for the answer, which it announces is the number 42. Deep Thought tells its creators that the answer makes no sense to them because they didn't know what the ultimate question had been in the first place. So he suggested designing an even greater computer to determine what the ultimate question was. This computer is actually the planet Earth, which was constructed by the Magratheans and was 5 minutes away from finishing its task and figuring out the ultimate question when the Vogons destroyed it. The hyper-intelligent super beings participated in the program as mice, performing experiments on humans while pretending to be experimented on. Okay. So yeah, did you follow all that? I mean, if you've read the book, you know you get it. It's like it's wild. It's like a mind fucking moment, right? Like incredible stuff.
Yeah.
I love this computer too. Deep Thought. It has a lot of personality to it. I love how one of my favorite bits was when they were like when the computer says that it's the second most intelligent computer, and they're like, what the hell, like, you know, we designed you to be the most intelligent computer, and then they start like asking it about other supercomputers, and it's utter disdain it has for all these other supercomputers that are being described, and the list goes on for a while, and it's hilarious. Before finally, of course, the computer that's going to far surpass it is going to be one that Deep Thought designs itself,
right,
at some future date.
Really good. I also love the philosophers coming up and being like, our jobs will be gone. And
yeah, they're like, mad about their jobs, right? It fits right back to that bureaucracy,
and then
right?
And then the amount of time, like, you know, bureaucracy famously moves very slowly, and like, okay, well, it's going to take millions of years before I can get you the answer, and like whole civilizations have to be formed around this, and I just kept thinking about how, like, along the way of society, I don't know, I just had this mental image of like a computer still computing, and as society reverts to like any sort of like ice age or like cave people back up through and down, and they're seeing it as magic versus seeing it as science. And
Yeah.
I just imagined what those millions of years like had within them.
And the number 42 being the answer is such an awesome joke, yet it is like the definition of an inside joke, because if you haven't read this book, it's not very funny. Like, I don't know, like, I think the first time I heard it, I was like, oh yeah, that's amusing. When someone like explained this to me, who, of course, ruining the book, not ruining it, but like spoiling a major part of the book.
Yeah.
Because I hadn't read it at the time. They're like, oh yeah, there's a supercomputer and it says that that's the answer. And I'm like, okay, that's kind of funny. But like, you really need to, because it's set up so brilliantly. It's like it's built up. It draws it out in suspense, and then it finally drops this 42 answer, and you're just like, what the fuck? So good. And it's like, no, you just you don't know what the question was.
I couldn't stop thinking about how 42 was Jackie Robinson's number, the first black athlete to play in Major League Baseball. And I was like, I have to know, like, why the significance of 42 for Douglas Adams specifically,
Yeah, I don't know. I bet someone had to have asked him that at some point, but I didn't encounter it in my research.
He probably wouldn't have said, though.
Yeah, maybe not. I did think that, I think we're coming up on the 42nd anniversary of this book. Right? If it came out in 79, that would be later this year, in September of this year. So I think we're sandwiched between like the 42nd anniversary of the radio show and the 42nd anniversary of the book. So once again, we didn't time it to come out like to commemorate that or anything, but it's kind of cool to think about.
Really cool, yeah.
All right, so I'm going to read the final plot here. Slarty Bartfast takes Arthur to see his friends, who are at a feast hosted by Trillion's pet mice. They reject the idea of building a new Earth to start the process over and offer to buy Arthur's brain in case it contains the question, leading to a fight when he declines. Zaphod saves Arthur from having his brain removed as police from the planet Blagulon Kappa arrive to arrest Zaphod. The mice, hoping to start a lucrative career on chat shows and the lecture circuit in their home dimension, decide to pretend that the ultimate question was, quote, how many roads must a man walk down? After the police repeatedly shoot at Zaphod, they suddenly die when their life support systems short-circuit. Suspicious, Ford discovers on the surface that Marvin became bored and explained his view of the universe to the police officer's spaceship, causing it to commit suicide. The five leave Magrathea and decide to go to the restaurant at the end of the universe. And that's the end of the book. So yeah, Marvin forces an AI to commit suicide talking to it.
Yeah,
which is hilarious.
The cop stuff was pretty fucking real, huh? Like, I was like, it was very, very funny to me.
Yeah.
But sadly, fucking, this was written in 79 and sadly still holds pretty true. And
yeah, it's almost like police brutality has been a problem for a real long time.
Yeah, interesting, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, there's all their musings about like why they're good cops too. I was like, oh man, this is like why. Like, I'm a liberal-minded cop and this, that, da da da. And we don't feel good. I don't feel good about doing this stuff. I go home at the end of the night and I cry to my girlfriend or whatever the quote was, something like that.
One of them was like writing novels, but they haven't been published yet. So
they're angry. Yeah.
So he's like, so we better watch out.
Yeah.
Which is like a funny writer joke.
Morbid too, a little bit. Obviously.
Yeah, man. We also didn't even talk about the dolphins, which, so long and thanks for all the fish is their famous quote they give as they leave right before the Earth gets destroyed. I love the idea that they're like actually more intelligent than all of humanity. And yeah, I mean, humans look down on them because all they do is like fuck around in the ocean all day, and that's like the reason that they look at humanity as less intelligent, because they don't do that. So good.
Yeah, I love there's a moment with same thing. So they're like the second most intelligent beings on the earth, and the first being the mice. When Arthur was going through the lists of all of the things that they would do to mice to Slarty Bartfast, he was saying like, we would do this and that and all this stuff, and somehow, eventually we would learn things about ourselves, and then he was like, oh yeah, you learned things about yourselves, and was basically like they were training you this whole time, they were testing you instead.
So funny. The idea that they're pan-dimensional, like super intelligent beings who would like allow themselves to die, quote unquote, because they're not really dying, and like that's the thing, man. Like, you start thinking about it, that it's like Could that be true? Yes, it could be. Like, how would we ever know? That's one of the tinfoil hat conspiracies about aliens is like they're here, they're just like so good at hiding that we don't know it, that kind of stuff. And of course, like, how could you ever know if they're, especially if they're like an extra dimensional, like, if they exist on a realm beyond our comprehension,
or beyond, literally beyond our vision as well. Like we know certain frequencies we can see within and stuff, and like,
man, that reminds me of like one of my favorite. Just like, it's a small character, but it's the shade of blue. It's like an intelligent shade of blue that has been like bodied in a prism of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's what I was talking about. Like all the like bizarre beings that are just like rattled off. So many just like funny, like clever, brilliant throwaways in here. It's just packed full of it for such a small book. Just good stuff, man. It's like, the Stephen Fry audiobook version, I think it's like 5.5 hours long or something. So like, check it out if you haven't already. Even if you have read this book, maybe check out the audiobook again, because you can listen to it in an afternoon.
And I think so. I'm definitely going to continue on. Yeah, this is a beach read, like nice something you just sit down on an afternoon and take it.
But it's got such big concepts. Like I wouldn't even call it a beach read, because like
it's not in the traditional sense, not in the.
But it's easy. I see what you're saying. It's easy
like,
to read.
It's a nice Sunday afternoon read to kind of just get through, and you can put it down and think about it, obviously, as well. But so at the end, they go to the restaurant at the end of the universe. Is that? I feel like with all the titles,
I think it's like the title of the next book.
That's what I was going to ask. Yeah.
Yeah. Which I don't know much about, but I'm curious. What a fucking task. I know that the screenplay. It sounds like Douglas Adams wrote it early on, and he was shopping it around and modifying it, revising it, trying to get this made into a film. And unfortunately, it was made, after he died.
Mm-hmm.
But adapting this into a film just seems like a monumental task. Like there's so many like mind-bending, concept just defying. I don't even know what that means, but maybe that's appropriate. There's just so many things that it's beyond film that I'm like, how do you put this into a film? And so I'm gonna be curious to see like how things were adapted when we watch this thing. I think I have seen it, but I just like I don't remember it, so I'm excited to watch it again.
Yeah, I've definitely seen it. It's been a while now, but I mean, I remember there definitely being an incredible cast, and I think they lean into that heavily.
I know Martin Freeman's in it, and a few others.
Do you? Yeah, I don't want to say anything in case you don't.
We'll get into that next week. But what are your takeaways?
I mean, like I said, I think one of the major things I take away is for my sensibilities, this is one of my favorite books that we've covered in the podcast, just because it really doesn't overstay its welcome. It left me wanting more, but even more than that, like the way that it tackles like heady concepts, and the way that it's unflinchingly satirical and like willing to go to crazy places and break conventions in ways that most people wouldn't want to, you wouldn't want to even try to navigate those waters. It just seems like such a tall task. And then, that brings us into the adaptation. Like it just seems like a tall task to adapt as well. But overall, I mean, like I said, it's one of I'm definitely putting it on a list of books that would describe to a stranger my personality. So there's that.
Yeah. I love that it within its pages contains the meaning of life, right? Like in an absurd way. Like the whole story explains Earth and its purpose as this supercomputer that is designed to determine the meaning of life. And like as a metaphor for existence, that's kind of profound. Like there's so many layers to this, right? Like, I don't know. I love that. Like, what if the meaning is to question the meaning? Like, what if that's the meaning?
Like the reason for living is living. Like this is, to experience.
And to question what the reason is. Like,
right.
to try and find out, like to forever pursue that question. What if that's the reason?
I also felt like the philosophers, when they showed up, I thought that was going to be their reasoning. I thought they were going to be like, we don't want to know the meaning. If we knew the actual like finite answer, then that would, get rid of everything we could possibly have.
Yeah, I kind of thought that too, but no, it's like I'll lose my job and I won't be able to have any money. And then it's funny that I think they threatened to go on strike, which just the idea of like a bunch of philosophers going on strike is hilarious to me.
It's very funny.
I think that's going to be about it for the book, man. This was a lot of fun. Like I said, we will be back next week for the movie. If you enjoyed this coverage, please let us know in the form of a rating and review. We haven't got any on Apple podcasts in a little while, so I'd love to see some new ones on there. Helps us get more eyes on us, get more ears on us. There we go. That's more accurate.
Speaking of eyes on us, if you wanted to help support the podcast, we do have a Patreon, patreon.com/ink2film, and we did just do that video content there exclusively. So if you wanted to check that out and support the podcast, see our faces, and we, like we said before, we did this sort of tiered. We decided where our projects from the first 2 seasons fit on a tier list of S to F, S, A, B, C, D, F.
There you go. That's all of them. Yeah, it was fun. It was a challenge. I know we were agonizing. I think at one point you were like, "It's crazy that word, that sentence just came out of your mouth." So
comparing 2 different projects, what goes above what was stuff.
Good times. If you'd like to connect with us on social media, we're at Ink2Film on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and we have a Council of Inklings on there as well as a Facebook group. All right. So long, and thanks for all the fish.
Until next time.
Thanks for listening.